There are many questions in life that man seeks the answer to. What is the meaning of life? What is true love? And finally, can it run Crysis? In November of 2007, the world was introduced to Crysis, a new first-person shooter developed by Crytek using their own proprietary Crytek engine for the PC. The game was a graphical showcase and pushed the high-end PCs to their absolute limits at that time, with many PCs being unable to even handle the game. Crysis ended up becoming a bit of a franchise with other subsequent releases, but the first Crysis game is the game that many seem to have the most fond memories of. Now, Crysis did see a console release on the PS3 and the Xbox 360, and a remastered edition of Crysis, aptly named Crysis Remastered, was announced for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch. While the PS4 and the Xbox One versions of the game ended up getting a bit of a delay, the Nintendo Switch version actually ended up coming out first, which, if you're a Nintendo Switch owner, is something that you are definitely not used to when it comes to third-party titles. So how did Crysis Remastered turn out on the Nintendo Switch? Is it a first-person shooter that you should add to your library? And more importantly, can the Nintendo Switch even run Crysis? I mean, yeah, it did come out on the system. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But without any further ado, let's talk about Crysis Remastered for the Nintendo Switch and see if this is a game you'll want to check out. So the story of Crysis plays out a lot like a science fiction movie that you might have seen before, but I do think it gets the job done. In the distant year of 2020, a North Korean general named Kyong takes over an island that is inhabited by American archaeologists, led by Dr. Rosenthal, who is doing investigative work on this island. A team of Delta Force military members, including yourself, codenamed Nomad, are sent to the island to rescue the Americans, retrieve information, and stop Kyong. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, that sounds more like a standard war plot than a science fiction movie. But those archaeologists are actually looking at alien technology that is on this island, which is why Kyong is so interested in this project. The story takes many twists and turns and actually ends on a pretty big science fiction moment, which I appreciated. It wasn't super gripping or anything like that, but I do think the story does do a good job of progressing everything that's happening in the game in order to keep you interested throughout. Gameplay-wise, Crysis Remastered is a first-person shooter, with some other elements thrown in for good measure. Your character, Nomad, is a bit more high-tech than the average soldier, and has something called a Nanosuit. Now this Nanosuit allows you to do different things when it has a charge to it. First, Nomad can do a standard sprint, but he can run even faster when the Nanosuit has that full charge, and the charge does regenerate over time. Along with that, you have a standard jump you could do, but with a charged Nanosuit, you can do a super jump that's about 3 times the height of a normal jump. You also have 2 abilities that you could trigger at any time. The first ability is a cloak. Now the cloak pretty much turns you into a predator-like character, in which you aren't visible to enemies should you want to take a stealthy approach to your mission. The second is an armor bubble. When enemies attack, you won't take any health damage as long as you are using this armor bubble and it still has a charge on it. These various abilities actually add a lot to the gameplay because you could sort of play it the way you want to play it. If you want to go in stealthy with silenced weapons and your cloak, you can do that. You want to go in guns blazing with ARs and protect yourself with the armor bubble? Well, you can do that too. One of the most interesting things about Crysis is the gameplay structure for your missions. Now you're constantly tasked with a main mission, but how you get to the mission point is pretty much up to you. While it's not exactly an open world game or anything like that, the areas themselves do tend to feel very open, and there's multiple paths and ways to get to your objective point. It honestly gives you a great sense of freedom when you're trying to figure out the best way to attack a mission. The enemies themselves are actually pretty tough, with good accuracy and decent artificial intelligence. They will swarm you, surround you, and even call in backup as well. I actually played through the game on the normal difficulty, and honestly, I died a lot, so I'm sure the additional difficulties are even crazier. The gunplay in the game is very solid, with a decent variety of weapons, from your standard pistol and shotguns to various types of ARs. You can actually customize your weapons on the fly by holding down the minus button on the Nintendo Switch, and take off or add attachments for whatever you're trying to do. Aside from the gunplay in the game, there's several vehicles you command, ranging from a standard pickup truck or a boat to heavy armored vehicles. Sometimes it's just fun to hop in a truck and try to get away from a gun battle, or use a tank to clear out some enemies. The game also has some missions where you have to use a vehicle for a short period of time as well. One thing that Crysis was known for when it first came out was the powerful Crytek engine that would literally just blow up some PCs trying to run it, and that actually plays a role in the gameplay and the graphics of the game. Crysis features an impressive destruction system for the environment and the buildings that honestly is still impressive today. When you're in a wooded area and are in battle, the trees will fall around you as bullets are whizzing throughout the air. Gonna try and hide in a building? Well, good luck with that, because buildings can be blown up and shot up through. The physics engine used in the game is still pretty crazy, as everything gets destroyed dynamically and in real time around you, forcing you to sort of change up your game plan on the fly. It creates some really tense and fun moments that always make you wonder what's going to happen next. Of course though, we have to talk about the graphics of Crysis Remastered. Now the Nintendo Switch does have some first-person shooter games on the system, with some looking better than others. To me, Doom is probably the best looking first-person shooter on the Nintendo Switch, but I definitely think you can make a case for Crysis to be right up there with it, and potentially even better looking than Doom. The remastered edition of Crysis adds in things like dynamic lighting, improved textures, and redone assets. While this is technically my first time playing through the original Crysis game, I did check out some footage of the game running on the PS3 to sort of compare it to the Nintendo Switch version, and really you could see some pretty clear differences. The lighting in the Nintendo Switch version is much better, character models are improved, and the colors are way more bright and vibrant. Now, will it look as good as the PS4 or the Xbox One version of the game when they end up coming out? I mean, of course not, but it is definitely for the most part a very impressive looking game, considering that it is running essentially on a hybrid portable system. Also, I have to give props to the game for it running in handheld mode. Games like Wolfenstein 2, which are great, get extremely blurry in handheld mode, but Crysis remains pretty sharp and crisp when playing it on the go, which I feel like is one of the main draws for a lot of people with this version of the game. Now, however, we do have to talk about some of the bad sides for Crysis Remastered on the Nintendo Switch, and there are a few issues. Sticking with the performance stuff, the game does suffer from some frame rate hiccups, especially when a checkpoint pops up. While this isn't a huge deal, the game does have a lot of checkpoints, and it's kind of annoying when you encounter a checkpoint and the game stutters every single time. Beyond that, the frame rate is mostly solid overall, but there are some times when things get very hectic that the frame rate will drop noticeably, which can once again take you a bit out of your experience. I also ran into an issue that I didn't get to capture or anything like that, but I entered a room that for some reason wouldn't load. I could actually walk around the room when I was in it, but it was basically just an empty, untextured area. Thankfully, I reloaded the checkpoint I had before it and it was fine, but still kinda weird. Crysis on the Nintendo Switch offers 10 missions, while the PC version of the game had 11 missions. It seems like the Switch version of the game is based on the Xbox 360 and PS3 versions, which removed one of the missions. So that was kind of annoying to be missing one of the missions, as this was my first time playing through the game. And finally, while 9 out of 10 of the missions are very fun and engaging, there's one mission I did not like at all. Now, without going too much into spoiler territory or anything like that, it's essentially a mission in which there is no gravity, and you have to traverse your way through a very strange place. Not only does this mission suck, but I was literally getting motion sickness from while I was playing it, and that never happens to me in any sort of game. Now, obviously, this is a personal preference thing, but I did want to mention it. Damn you, Mission 7, damn you to hell! Also, Crysis Remastered is a single-player only experience with no multiplayer, even though the original release of the game did have multiplayer. Now, this is across the board with all versions of the game, including the PS4 and the Xbox One, so it's not exclusive to the Nintendo Switch or anything like that, but I did want to mention that in case you were looking forward to some online multiplayer with this game. With all that being said though, Crysis Remastered on the Nintendo Switch is yet another technical marvel done by Saber Interactive, who of course handled The Witcher 3 on the Nintendo Switch. This is yet again probably a game that shouldn't really run on the Nintendo Switch, yet it does, and for the most part it is super impressive. The gameplay in the game still feels fresh and fun, the destruction elements are still crazy to experience, and it's a fun 10 or so hour adventure. Crysis Remastered is also just a $30 game, so if you're itching for a new first-person shooter on the Nintendo Switch, this is definitely a game I recommend. Sure, there's some issues here and there with the game, but I feel like the total package outweighs all that by far, especially if you enjoy playing the game in handheld mode. And hey, if you only own a Nintendo Switch, you can finally brag to your PS4 and Xbox One friends that you got a game they want before they did on their platform. Alright, so that is my review of Crysis Remastered on the Nintendo Switch. I definitely was very impressed with this game. It's a lot of fun, and it's pretty crazy to consider the fact that this game originally released 13 years ago, yet it still feels very fresh. It still implements mechanics that you don't see in a lot of first-person shooter games, and I think it's just a fantastic experience. Like I said, this was my first time playing the original Crysis game. I did play Crysis 3 on the Xbox 360 back in the day, but as my first time playing this game, I was definitely very impressed with it. It was a lot of fun, and to see how well it runs on the Nintendo Switch when it really doesn't have any business being on the system was definitely very impressive and very cool. So let me know in the comments section down below what you think of Crysis Remastered for the Nintendo Switch. Have you checked out this game? Do you plan on checking out this game, or are you going to wait for a sale? Or do you not like first-person shooters? And then I have to sort of ask you, well, why did you watch this video? I mean, clearly it was about a first-person shooter game. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video, regardless of why you watched it. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Be sure to check out other videos on the channel as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.